If you care about financial security, your own or the nation's, you should read this book. Ellen Brown developed her research skills as an attorney practicing civil litigation in Los Angeles. In Web of Debt, her latest book, she turns those skills to an analysis of the Federal Reserve and the money trust. She shows how this private cartel has usurped the power to create money from the people themselves and how we the people can get it back. Her website is www.webofdebt.com. Enjoy the interview. Ellen, welcome to Gnostic Media's podcast. How are you today?
I'm fine, thank you.
There's two basic fields that I'm beginning to see, and one is as you mentioned a minute ago, the nationalization of the money system, and the other one is this movement to go back to the gold and or silver standard. And in fact, you just mentioned a minute ago G. Edward Griffin, who I've had on my show before, and I've in fact, just yesterday I read an article from him where he was stating definitively that anybody who is for nationalizing the Federal Reserve has completely lost their mind, and that gold and silver is the only way to go. And so, talk about the two different policies and explain why your position is different or more correct over and I have to say first that I agree with you that your position is better than the position to go back after the gold and silver standard, which is what the Wizard of Oz was about.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. Yeah. I loved Ed Griffin's book, World Without Cancer, and I loved Creature from Jekyll Island right up to the end, till he got the solution, and I thought, that just isn't going to work. And then I found Stephen Zarlenga's book, which I just forgot the title of.
Lost Science of Money.
Oh, right, The Lost Science of Money, and that made much more sense to me, but I had already thought that government should be issuing the money. The thing about going back to gold, it was gold that got us into this mess. Gold was always a ruse. There was never really enough gold to form the money supply. It always had to be backed by paper money. In fact, the gold standard went back to the 17th century when goldsmiths, people left their gold with the goldsmiths for safekeeping, and the goldsmiths would give them these paper receipts for the gold. And people found that they would rather trade the paper receipts because they were more convenient and they were safer to carry around. And then other people would want to borrow gold, but they didn't want the gold either. They wanted the paper receipts. So the goldsmiths soon discovered that they could lend 10 times as many paper receipts as they had gold, because people only came for their gold 10% of the time. So that's where the privately issued money creation came from. It was this ruse that you could always trade in your paper dollars, your paper banknotes for gold, but you really couldn't, because you could only do it if the other 90% of the people who had a claim to the same gold didn't do it. If they all did it at once, there would be a bank run and the system would fall apart. And that's where we are today, where in the 19th century there were a series of bank runs, and then they came up with the Federal Reserve to backstop the banks so they could get reserves from each other and from the Federal Reserve. And then the FDIC to, backstop the deposits, and now we've gone into all sorts of other machinations to keep the banks going. The derivative scheme, and they figured out how to securitize loans and sell them off so they could make. It's all a scam to keep this pyramid scheme going that's inherently fraudulent. In other words, they're issuing money they don't have. So Ed Griffin would go back to a pure gold system. So let's think about that. The last time I saw, there was $4 trillion worth of gold in the world. So even assuming you could get all the gold, and we have a money supply. Nobody knows what it is now because they're not keeping track of M3 anymore. They're not reporting it. But it used to be like 13 trillion. So even assuming you could get your hands on every piece of gold, you would have to revalue the gold by 400%. So right away, your gold pieces wouldn't represent anything like the real market value of gold. So it's just arbitrary. I mean, you might as well, if you want a fixed money supply, you might as well just have the government issue a fixed number of paper dollars and never issue any more. You don't need the gold at all. What's the point of gold that has no reference to the real money supply? But the other question is, how are you going to get the gold? If you're going to try to buy it from Indians, let's say, who are wearing it, most gold is in other countries. If you're going to try and buy it from them, what are you going to pay them with? Because your dollars aren't going to be worth anything. So we'd be stuck with only using the amount of gold that's in Fort Knox right now. And
well, wouldn't they just?
Rumors are there's nothing there.
Wouldn't they just do like they had done historically and just go and kill the tribe or the group of people that had the gold and take it? Isn't that how they typically acquired gold?
Well, that's the thing. Or they would confiscate it from us, the people who have it in the United States. That's what they did in the 30s. I mean, we gold holders don't really want that. So I think if you like gold, just keep it for an investment. It's a real good investment. And then if the dollar collapses, like they're all sure it will, although I don't really think it will, but if it does, your gold is going to be worth a lot more. So you don't really need to turn it into coins. Another problem is, Ron Paul would have various currencies, allow gold and allow silver and allow anything else that people want to trade in. But then you're going to have the same problem that the colonists had. You had these different provinces. They had all these different currencies going at once. They'd get devalued relative to each other. The British merchants didn't know what they were getting paid in, and they were the ones that complained to the king and said, this money's being devalued, and it doesn't seem to have any consistent value. So would you allow exchange rates between these different currencies? And what if you had gold coins and silver coins? And what if the price of silver changed relative to the price of gold? Would you change the face amount of those pieces? Or would you just leave them unmarked and then they would just be worth whatever their market value was? And if you do that, why bother to call them coins? Why don't you just call them gold bars and sell them on the market for their market price? To me, it makes so much more sense to have a publicly issued money that has a stable value of some sort, that's stabilized in some way. I would say it should be stabilized against. It's issued by the government, and so it depends on the rules you impose on issuing it. But let's say the government's only allowed to issue it for real goods and services. That's the old real bills doctrine. Then it would, if the money reflects the money supply, reflects the goods and services in the economy. If it's only issued to create goods and services, you won't have inflation because the money will go up at the same rate that the goods and services will go up, so the price will remain the same. You only get inflation when you have speculation or when you're paying off foreign debts. That's where most of these hyperinflation situations arise, where they have these huge foreign debts that they can't afford to pay, and they can't issue that currency. Like people who owe their debts in dollars and they don't have the dollars, so they have to print their own, like Zimbabwe. They're madly printing their Zimbabwe dollars to get U.S. dollars, and the speculators know that, so they're madly inflating, or in other words, increasing the amount of Zimbabwe dollars that it would take to buy the U.S. dollar, which makes its value inflate horribly.